Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Andy Boyd, marketing coordinator for TCG Books, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm so excited to introduce this TCG Books Presents event featuring Richard Nelson, Richard Pevear, and Larissa Volokhonsky in conversation with Gregory Mosher. They will be discussing our newly published translation of Anton Chekov's Ivanov, as well as the entire classic Russian drama series, which now includes 8 titles, including all of Chekhov's major plays, as well as works by Nikolai Gogol, Mikhail Bulgakov, and Ivan Turgenev. We're so happy to have you here with us this afternoon. For accessibility purposes, I'm going to share a visual description with you. I'm a white man with brown hair and a beard, wearing glasses and a blue button-down shirt. We'll now take a moment to offer our respects to the many lands on which we gather and to honor the traditional stewards of those lands. If you have a land acknowledgement as part of your personal or organizational practice, we invite you to share them in the comments below. While you do, I'll read the land acknowledgement posted in TCG's office. Theater Communication Group's offices are located on the Lenape Island of Mannahatta in Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor the generations of stewardship the Lenape peoples have given to the water, air, and land. As guests, we pay respect to the Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, here in their homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. While acknowledgement is important, it is not enough. That's why TCG has put together a webpage with multiple ways you can support Native-led movements for justice, and we'll share a link to that page in the chat now. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank the partners and supporters who have made this event possible. I'd like to start by thanking Gregory Mosher, Senior Associate Dean for the Arts at Hunter College, and the Patty and Jay Baker Professor of Theater, as well as the Hunter College Theater Department for co-hosting this event. Check out their upcoming productions and events at huntertheater.net, including their current production of Sweat by Lynn Nottage. TCG Books Presents is supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, along with public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and generous individual donors like you. We are also supported by a generous grant from the Mellon Foundation and by the National Endowment for the Arts. If you'd like to support events like this and all of TCG's programs, from our federal arts advocacy to our ED&I initiatives, please visit tcg.org/donate or click the link that we're sharing now. I'd also like to acknowledge our incredible publisher, Terry Nemeth, and outstanding editorial director, Kathy Sova, who are both fiercely dedicated to publishing and preserving the work of playwrights and theater makers. One last thing before I turn over the mic, as this event is a celebration of Ivanov and the entire classic Russian drama series, I would be remiss if I did not remind you that you can purchase this title and all of our books on our website, tcg.org/books. We're also offering a limited time 30% discount on all print titles in the classic Russian drama series using promo code Anton. And now I'd like to turn the virtual mic over to Richard Nelson, Richard Pevear, and Larissa Volokhonsky, and Gregory Mosher.
Hey, thanks, Andy. I'm Gregory Mosher. I want to thank you and everyone at TCG who made this possible, and of course, Terry Nemeth and all the people who've worked on getting these books published. I think I'm going to say, oh man, there's too much going on my screen here. Hello, Richard Nelson and Richard Pevear and Larissa Volokhonsky. I am such an admirer of yours. I knew Richard and Larissa, or met them more recently than I met Richard Nelson, with whom I've been working since we were both wee things. And it's a pleasure to be with all three of you today. Because this is a TCG event, I'm imagining that most of the people tuned in are theater followers, theater makers, theater lovers, but I'm also sure that lots of people have read your amazing translations of the giants of Russian literature, which is how I encountered you. Your Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and many other Russian authors, Gogol, have changed the way we see those writers, and they've been a great gift to all of us who love literature, and particularly 19th century Russian literature. So thank you for that. I think because most of us are probably theater people or perhaps translators, we all know Chekhov, or we've all experienced Chekhov in a scene study class, or maybe we've been lucky enough to act in a play of his in a real production, direct or design or stage manage or be on the crew. And God knows there is no shortage of English language translations of this writer. There must be, you'd know better than I would, but there must be hundreds and hundreds, not only people who started doing it at the beginning of the 20th century. Cherry Orchard, the last of the major plays, is 1904, as I'm sure most of you know. But pretty much every major American and English dramatist has adapted at least one of these plays. I'm very grateful that the three of you found each other, because you've created these astonishing translations. They're very satisfying on page and even more so on stage. Before I get to the process, which I certainly want to talk about, I'm just curious how you met, how you had these independent careers going on, Richard as a playwright and Richard and Larissa as translators. How did you even meet? What started this?
Richard Nelson started it. He's responsible for it all.
How did it happen?
I mean, it sort of goes back to, I had been, as you know, Gregory, had been translating, quote unquote, translating plays for a long time, along with my own playwriting. And I've been translating off of literal translations. Sometimes those translations would be commissioned as a word-by-word translation. Sometimes I'd work off of public domain old translations. And I was bringing something to the table, I thought, that to help these plays become actable, allow them to be easily spoken, blah, blah, blah. But I certainly, when I came across Chekhov and started to work on Chekhov, I started to feel that I was missing something. There was much, I was guessing a lot. I just thought the plays were richer than I could tell and I could know. And I didn't know what to do about it. And parallel to this, I had always had a difficulty reading Dostoevsky. I'd never finished Crime and Punishment. I'd never finished Brothers Karamazov. Each time I got stuck. And then one day I picked up a new translation of the Brothers Karamazov that I found at a bookstore in the Grand Central. And I started to read it. And suddenly a world opened up to me, a world that was complex, but also human, profoundly human, and funny and rich, nothing heavy, but just very human. It's like, who translated this? And it was Richard and Larissa. And then I got another book by them and another book by them and another book by them. And I kept reading and saying, this is, I mean, my dream would be, I know that to work with them, I could begin to answer these questions that I have about these plays and other Russian plays. And so I wrote them. I found through my agent their editor at, I think, Random House. And I wrote them a long email saying, I noticed that you've never translated plays, and I'm such a fan. Would you ever consider working with me on one? And they wrote right back. And we met, and they probably don't realize this, that in 2 days, on Monday, will be our anniversary.
Yeah.
We met on October 31st, 2010.
Wow.
Yeah, I went back to my notebooks and found this. And so for the last 12 years, we've been working every year except during the pandemic. We've been working every year, usually for a month, a year, and always in France, where Richard and Larissa live.
So, Richard, I see what you get out of Richard and Larissa, but Richard and Larissa, why did you need Nelson? I mean, you could read these Russian plays and just translate
I'll tell
them.
you the whole story and more.
I
The thing
won't.
is,
I won't be able to put in a word there.
no, you will put as many words as you like, all of them. I always wanted to translate plays. because I like to translate dialogue. And so I said, why don't we do a collection of Chekhov's plays or Gogol? I always wanted to translate Gogol. And Richard always said, no. Richard has his own story because he read an interview by a French translator. You will tell about it. Richard said we should work with someone who knows about theater, who knows about how words are uttered on stage. And he said, no, I won't. And then one day I just dug up our correspondence with Richard Nelson. It was 24th of August. Richard appeared in our summer place in the kitchen with the sheet of paper with printed out Richard Nelson's letter, long, because Richard likes to write long letters. And he said, your prayers are answered. And I said, oh my God, my prayers are answered. And it was Richard's letter suggesting that we should work together.
Which Richard wrote this letter?
And so we responded, and then we met in New York, as Richard Nelson just told us. It's very funny to work with two Richards. I say Richard, and they both are coming and saying.
I'm sure we'll experience that in the next 45 minutes. Richard Pevear, why? I mean, if the line is "please pass the peas," or "I don't love you anymore," or I'm trying to think of a quintessential Chekhov line. Why can't you just write "please pass the peas" or "I don't love you"? Why did you feel a playwright was necessary or advantageous?
Well, as Larissa mentioned, I had already talked with a great French poet who was translating Shakespeare and was talking about how difficult it is to do it without a director who knows what the stage will need. And I thought this is a very firm argument. I just have to wait till I will wait till I meet a dramatist, but I didn't expect to meet one, so I didn't translate any play.
So you also read this interview with Andrei Markovitch, who worked with Antoine Vitesse in the La Comédie Française.
Right.
I know that because it's published and well known by anyone who cares about Russian literature, that when you're translating Larissa does a first pass independently, and then you do a pass, Richard Pevear, and then you work on a final draft together. And that makes sense to me. When you add in Richard Nelson, would you just share with the listeners and watchers today what that's like?
Yes, I will very gladly, because there's one excuse me. There's one phrase I remember very clearly from Richard Nelson the first time we worked together. It was, "My actors won't be able to say that."
What's an example?
I don't remember what it was. It was from Turgenev or Gogol, but this is a way of thinking that I had never had in myself, because I'm used to translating prose, even poetry, but theater is another thing. That's why I was waiting for Richard to appear.
There is also, Richard also said, the audience will not know what it is.
Yeah.
And in theater, it's impossible, because it will create some kind of pause in understanding, and things will not go as smoothly as they should. I remember one word we quarreled over very much. It's a word that's very common in Russian 19th century literature. The word and also the phenomenon, pettifogger. the word was pettifogger. In Russian it's krючкотвор. It's someone who makes little hooks, meaning a bureaucrat who picks on little things and prevents things from going on smoothly and writes complaints and anyway makes everything impossible. It's a petty bureaucrat. And so I think in Cherry Orchard there was this word, krючкотвор, so we put down pettifogger. And Richard Nelson said, no, we won't have pettifogger. No one knows what it is. It's obsolete. I don't know what it is. He went to the dictionary. Anyway,
I want to interrupt this. Larissa, forgive me. There's an extra noise.
It's my hand on the microphone. I got carried away. And yes, so this pettifogger.
So no pettifogger. Richard, Nelson, you were gonna jump in a minute or two ago.
I think there's something that in our conversations, which is pretty wonderful around the table and pretty hard sometimes around the table, which is good. I mean, which is good. That what's a joy for me as a playwright and a director is that when we're looking at a line and there's another line following it, and it just doesn't sound like it slightly works, I don't quite see the leap. I don't see where that's coming from that. And if I can ask, I can say, does this word have any other slightly different meaning, or could it also mean in just some shift? And Larissa Richards say, yeah, it could mean that. I go, well, that's the answer. That in a rehearsal, if we were given that the first word, we'd work and struggle. But it's not a struggle. There is something there that really makes sense. So as we've talked, and Larissa and I have talked about this a number of times, is that excuse me, I keep asking, the question why? Why is this character saying this? The why comes from just understanding what's going on with the character. And that's something I think I've brought to the conversation, and trying to not make it as I did with my earlier translation, just trying to smooth things over and make it actable, but trying to really understand the character and what's going on. And with Chekhov, who writes such understatement, a little change, a little tiny change. I mean, I'll give you a great example that in the Cherry Orchard, there's a moment when Radomskaya, says to the student, to tutor, they're having a big discussion, and she's trying to get him to be more passionate about things. And he says, in almost all the English translations that I've seen, he says something like, I'm above love. I'm above love. Whole productions have been built around a character, around that phrase, because of the rhyme. Above love is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to say, and to say it, to come out of your mouth, that's how an actor will want to act it. It's ridiculous. Well, it's not a rhyme in Russian. And it's not ridiculous. We translate it as, I'm higher than love. And that's a whole different, so the entire play opens up by that little tiny thing of not being too clever, or as the English say, too clever by half, by making, in a translation, trying to be a little better than Chekhov.
Right.
You really, yeah.
Which takes us to the point of playwrights are writing code for actors, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
The actor has to take those same, in English, 26 letters forming words, and figure out human behavior out of those words. And because Chekhov's vocabulary is so simple, this is a particular challenge with him, right? He's not writing elaborate poetry. And one of the glorious things that the three of you have done is to simplify things. I went by some students were looking at a Chekhov scene the other day, and whereas Ostrov says to Vanya, you're and this is the untranslatable word that you turned into misfit, but is often translated as fool. I'm not worried about that. The translator had helped Chekhov by saying, you're a ridiculous fool. And one of the glories of what you've done is to just, well, honor what he wrote.
Yeah.
Richard Pevear, you were going to jump in a while ago while Mr. Nelson was talking.
I jumped out again.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens.
There is a whole, I don't know, whole layer of things that Richard Nelson adds to what we're doing. Because once we do our part, we sometimes says, what is Richard going to do with it? You know, it's such a good translation. It's perfect. You know, what is it that he's going to find there? And then he comes and we sit down together and he questions almost literally every single sentence. And I must say that I learned a great deal from that, because last year was the bicentennial of Dostoevsky, and we revised 3 of our translations of Dostoevsky's novels. And I must say that especially with the dialogue, I looked at things differently than I did 30 years earlier, 30 years before, when we were translating them.
Richard Nelson's fault. Yeah.
It's all his fault. Yes.
Gregory, there's also another thing, which has also been very, very interesting and very exciting, is that I mean, I come to this collaboration, you know, as someone who's been in the theater a long, long time, with a lot of experience in rehearsal rooms with directors, producers, and actors. And what we're used to thinking is that what we have in our hands published, even the translations, is just, that's the real thing. And we've been able to, Richard and Larissa, by going back and doing, and Larissa doing some incredible scholarship, going back and seeing that there have been drafts of these plays where things have been taken out and things have been changed. And they haven't been changed for the better. And they've been changed for very specific reasons that anyone who's worked on a bunch of plays in a rehearsal room understands. For the simple, I could give you many examples, but say in the Cherry Orchard, when Lopakhin comes in at the very beginning, comes into this room where he hasn't been, he says in the translations that we all know, says, I haven't been here since I was 15 years old, 15 or 16 years old. But we learned that actually in the version, in the script, the draft that Chekhov gave to Stanislavski to start rehearsals, it says, not since I was 4 or 5 years old. That's a gigantic difference. Why make that change? The change was made because the actress playing her, Chekhov's wife, Olga Knipper, was too young for the role to begin with. She was in her late 20s. And so the Lopakhin literally was older than her. And if he's going, and I'm seeing this since I was 5, and he talks about her, she'd be like 2 or 1. It didn't make any sense. So they must have had a worry, and they changed the times. But that changes the scene. Someone who comes into a room that they haven't been in since they were 4 or 5 is a different experience than one when they have when I'm in at 15. Yeah. But there's a myriad of things we've been able to, going back and just seeing and recognizing that Chekhov is part of theater, not just in stone, and theater is very fluid because of the way it's a collaborative form. I think in these translations, we've been able to add and change and publish elements that have been long lost or basically unknown.
But at the same time, we don't change the original. We very closely follow.
No, we don't change at all. We sometimes start from completely from opposite ends, and then we gradually, just sometimes suffering, come to some kind of agreement which satisfies both us as being faithful to the original, and Richard as being, as his actors can, something his actors can say, and the audience will understand too.
I'm glad you brought up the Cherry Orchard. For those of you who don't know, this version of the Cherry Orchard that these three wonderful writers have done includes both the pre-Moscow Art Theater version of the script and the script as most of us know it. And it is mind-blowing to look at these two scripts together in the same volume, just because we could spend the rest of our time together talking about the Cherry Orchard. I want to, I don't, has anyone done the pre-Stanislavski version? I should know the answer to that question. Has it been done on stage?
It's in English. This is the first time it's ever been translated. So, wow. So no in English. Elements of it have been done in other countries, but only, I think, moving the one scene that was cut and putting that back in, that's been done, but not all the things that we've done, to my knowledge.
All right, well, producers in the room, make that phone call. I want to read a quotation from Chekhov. He wanted a theater that was just as complicated and just as simple as in real life. People are sitting at a table having dinner, that's all. But at the same time, their happiness is being created or their lives are being torn apart. And we all know this is true about Chekhov. We know some version of that quote. But I have to say, I've only seen it pulled off twice, that simply the lives of the people on stage were so compelling. And the first time was Brooks' production of Cherry Orchard, God, 30, 40 years ago now. Which I saw in Paris 3 nights in a row and changed my life at the Bouffe du Nord. And the other is in this production that for which the three of you created the script and Richard Nelson directed, of Uncle Vanya, which Peter Brook came to see and admired greatly. I know because I saw him tell the cast that and talked to Richard about it later. This is so hard, this idea of creating theater, and we'll work our way back to the translation question of this, where you simply trust the life. I messed up 3 of these plays by trying to find some sort of plot, with the story of the seagull is Constantine wants to become a great writer and everybody has to fit into that story, or Lopakin wants to be worthy of this act of kindness that Ranovskaya gave him when he was either 5 or 16 years old. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities of creating drama that is not plot driven, that is simply about life? I know you talk to the actors about this all the time, Richard. You say famously on the first rehearsal, your job is to, and I'll let you say it. But if you could talk about that from a what that means for the words on the page.
Yeah, to finish that, I tell my actors on the first day, your job is to put people on the stage who are as complicated, confused, ambiguous, lost, alive as any one person in the audience, and that we will always fail. We can't do that, but that's our goal. That's as simple as that. And then I believe in my reading of Chekhov is exactly what Chekhov is about, and why I go to him again and again and again as an inspiration for myself as a playwright, especially. It's to me, and this is where so much of Chekhov can go off the rails in productions. For me, the very essence is in the series of relationships. It's about relationships. When you have 5 people on the stage at the same time, you have a myriad of relationships. Everyone is in relation to everybody else at a given time, at a given moment. And that's a world. A world is created. And if you can create that world and give it depth, then it starts to become universal. And which is why Chekhov, and I steal from this all the time, while Chekhov's great plays are really family plays. They're about a family, each one. And they each one, therefore, you come in at the beginning of the play, and everyone or the family has a deep and profound history with each other, which is the motivating element in these relationships. And very little happens, very little plot happens, very little story happens. I mean, Uncle Vanya, basically almost nothing happens except, there's just a moment when someone gets really upset and tries to shoot somebody and misses. But the whole world happens. The whole lifetime happens. What?
Larissa wants to speak.
Oh, I always want to speak. I would like to add to that. We're not theater people at all, but certain things come through simply through language, through the language. Chekhov is a mysterious writer. In his plays, we're going to talk about Ivanov. The first typescript manuscript of Ivanov said a comedy in 4 acts. And then he crossed out the word comedy and wrote drama above it. So it is this, it's not clear where it is, whether it's comedy or drama, or probably both. That drama is, human drama is always a little bit of or not a little, but maybe more than a little of a comedy. And I think this is also a very important thing to know about Chekhov.
Yeah, I always remember when what Stanislavski said about what Chekhov said about his cherry orchard. He said, but it's a comedy. It's a comedy. And he said, what do you mean a comedy? It's a tragedy.
So you anticipated my next question, which is to talk about this comedy.
I didn't finish it because I wanted to come around finally to Ivanov, because I have the same question about Ivanov. Chekhov wrote this play in 10 days. I came to him and said, could you give us a little play for our Korsh came to him and said, could you give us a little play for our little theater, our new theater? And he got very excited. And in 10 days, he wrote Ivanov. He had already tried to write.
Actually, I'll interrupt for 1 second. In Korsh's theater, the actors wanted a play by Chekhov because they said he tickles our nerves. He said let's get something from Chekhov, and all he had written by then, all he wrote by then, is 2 little 1-act comedies. The Swan Song and I forget, Gideon despite himself. So I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Yes. Now I don't know what I was saying. Yeah, the thing is, where did this play come from in Chekhov? 10 days he produced it, and now I'm reading it and rereading it and thinking, what is it? Is it a comedy of provincial life, or is it a tragedy of provincial life? Is it a melodrama of some sort? How theatrical is it? It's actually much more theatrical than his later plays. There are all kinds of things. There are soliloquies. There are sudden stage endings, like when Anna Petrovna catches him kissing Sasha, and goes, and he looks and says, Sarah, and that's his curtain laugh. You know, he stopped doing that later. But, so there's a lot of real theatrics in it, but is it a satire? Is it a comedy? Is it a tragedy? What is it? It's very hard to pin down. And then I realized that this is always the case with Chekhov. It's hard to know what his plays are, but this play, Ivanov, they talk about nothing but boredom. Everyone is bored. I'm bored. You're bored. I'm so bored.
And money. They also talk about money all the time.
Well, underneath, they're trying to deal with money. But
So,
Ivanov doesn't even have any money, but he would like to marry to get money, but he doesn't want to marry to get money. It's all banality and boredom, and they keep saying it. Everyone, even finally little Sasha says, boredom, this is so boring. How can you make a play where everyone says how boring?
well, how can you make a play where everyone says it's so boring?
Yeah, that's what I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I was with my students talking about that we were reading Waiting for Godot the other night. This is so boring. They're always saying, this is so boring. This is so boring. Nothing happens. Nobody comes. Nobody goes. It's unbearable. And you can't help but think about Chekhov when you're reading Godot.
Yeah, I was thinking about Godot when I was thinking about Chekhov. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's the world is maybe feeling bored, and the world of Ivanov and the world that Ivanov is in is like a swamp. But it's about someone who sort of, his eyes have opened up and he sees a swamp. And he's asking really this profound question all the way through. Do I have meaning? Is there meaning? I mean, it's the most existential questions you could ask. You know, basically, is there a God? You could be saying, but basically, do I matter? And so that constantly coming up against a world is how that I think that in my reading of the play, that's how it functions. And so it's not just blah. There is a tension of how do I live in this world that doesn't seem to matter, have any meaning whatsoever?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty 2022, isn't it?
So he dies of it. In the first version of the play, he doesn't even shoot himself. He simply slumps on his chair and dies. He dies because he cannot live.
Yeah. He never explains why he cannot live. What is it that got to him? It's something, and when they ask him, he says, I don't know. He keeps, this is his refrain all through the play. But what is it? I don't know. But what do you want? I don't know.
But I think that's what the rest of the world of the play is. He may not be able to say it, but Chekhov is showing us the world the swamp that he's in, what he's feeling. It's the only world he knows, but it's a swamp. And that's why it's both a satire and tragic and comic, all of those things together, that world, because it's a mess. Very much in the way in which, you both wrote, articulated for me something like in The Demons, for example, but just where it's a mess, complete mess. But anyway.
It's on the one hand, here's this writer with a heart the size of Russia, had Chekhov. On the other hand, another part of his life was the man who became a very famous journalist or writer for the newspapers, and wrote very funny pieces. I'm sure you know the story about him sitting in a cafe with a friend having a drink, and the friend says, "Why are you staring at the salt shaker?" And Chekhov says, well, because I have to go home back to the office and write 400 funny words by 6 o'clock. And I think I'm going to make them about the salt shaker. That's a level of writing skill that's fairly formidable. And you take that heart and you take that skill, you take that power of observation, really. What's funny about this salt shaker? And you kind of end up with the plays. And I get it's because we're going to head into Q&A in a second, at the risk of sounding like Charlie Rose or somebody, he's an American interviewer, Richard and Larissa. This question is so general, but I just, it's such an opportunity. I wonder if you'd like to say why you admire Chekhov so much, or what you find special, or what you find pleasurable, or why you admire him. I'd just be curious to hear what you two have to say about it.
Who, us?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. The more I read and the more I think about Chekhov, the more elusive he becomes. But it's this elusiveness that's interesting, because he never gives way to some sort of banality. There are no banality. If there a banality appears, it immediately gets denounced. That even happens very clearly in Ivanov.
It's interesting because he writes about banal people.
Yeah.
And it should be boring, and yet it's never really boring. And it's interesting to translate it, because you cannot fall into banality. It's never quite banal enough. It's always it always somehow lifts you up and makes you think. Why? What's going on? What is it? And it's I remember Richard Nelson likes to quote Chekhov as saying that everything is mixed in this life. Everything is mixed up. And I never could. I actually never could find this quotation, but it's quoted all the time.
helpful anyway.
It should be boring, but it isn't. There is a kind of mesmerizing quality in it.
Right.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, sorry.
Even in his little comedies, as we now call them, that he was writing almost at the same time as Ivan. The people in them are not comic figures. They're real people. He confronts them with comic situations, and they behave comically, but they're real living people. They have real living needs and qualities. And this is the thing in Chekhov, in all of his stories, in all of his plays, is that these things are, maybe he heightens them in dramatizing them, but they're real human things. They are not symbolic. They're not traditional. They're not comical in costumes. Even if his characters put on a costume, like in his comedy about the Swan Song, where he comes out in a clown costume.
Right.
He's not a
there is one word that Chekhov likes to attach to his characters, chudak, which is untranslatable, completely untranslatable. Chudak means an odd fellow, a sort of funny, strange, wacko, weird fellow. And you can't attach any single meaning to it. And
so you translate it in different ways, Larissa, depending on the context of the play, or do you
yes,
now have a word that you use for that?
Always it, but in Astrov in Uncle Vanya says it about himself, and it says, I've become a chudak, and we didn't know how to translate it, odd bird or what. And Richard came up with the word misfit, which I never would have come up with. Never. we needed Richard Nelson to come up with Misfit. And it worked beautifully because throughout the play he repeats Chudak, Chudak, I become a Chudak, or when you deal with a Chudak like me, and it worked beautifully. And Chekhov likes these bored people, these Chudaki, these funny, strange people. It's whole world. I don't even understand how someone could create so a big world populated with so many different people, different situations. They're doctors and some kind of bureaucrats and idle funny ladies, matchmakers, and everybody.
Card players like Cozy.
Yes.
Yes,
when we talk about Ace of Spades, I'll give you the Queen of Diamonds.
Right.
That's all he ever says.
Well, you three also have huge hearts and great literary skills, terrifyingly great literary skills. I think it's time to flip over to the audience. I'm sure there are a million questions that I didn't get to, perhaps even better questions. So Andy, I'm going to go back to you because I think you're fielding questions.
Yes.
And just in case, well, we don't have to come back to me at the end. I just want to say what a great pleasure and honor it was to be with you
Good
guys.
to be with you.
Thank you. And I haven't read Ivanov yet, but I look forward to very much. And I return to your novels whenever I don't know what to read. I just pick up a Pevear Volokhonsky edition of some Russian piece, and
it's nice to know at least one reader.
That makes us happy.
Yeah, so I'll start with the audience questions. We have a question from Graham. He writes, I am very curious about the challenge of translating malapropisms, nonsense words, and words Chekhov coined. You've sort of already started to answer that question a bit, Larissa, but I'd love to hear more about that. How do you translate words that aren't, even quite proper words in Russian?
It's hard to tell offhand, right, like that. Yeah, that there are. Well,
well, the malapropisms, usually Richard comes up with a pretty good malapropism.
A good malapropism.
And he's the malapropist. So that, we play them, we work them out. As long as I come into it to see if it's too strong or something, so it'll just draw the attention of the audience in the wrong way. But Richard is gearing it towards, trying to find that equivalent, and Larissa is there vigilantly saying, no, that's not what it means. So that's how we do it.
I remembered one word that I don't know that Chekhov coined it or not. I know that very old Russian people know it, and it's no longer in use. It's merenhlundia, and it had to be translated in some kind of funny way, and we came out with melanchondria.
Yeah.
Which is the melancholy and hypochondria together.
I even suffer from it myself.
Yeah, you suffer.
I suffer from melanchondria.
Okay.
So our next question comes from Emily, and Emily asks, in the Priest Stanislavski script for Cherry Orchard, there is that scene that you mentioned earlier that is cut in many versions between Anya and Trofimov, and she wonders, do you have any insights about why that scene may have been cut, what you feel that scene adds to the play, etc.?
The scene that was cut, well, there's a tiny little scene with Anya Trofimov that's cut at the very top of Act 2, which is just when we learn something important, that Anya has gone to the ants to try to get money. So between Acts 1 and 2, something has been someone's tried to make something happen, which is usually there's entire productions about how they don't care. No one cares about doing anything. So that's effective. But the really big cut, really big change is that at the end of Act Two, there's an entire scene between the Charlotta and Fears. That Charlotta's long speech, which is usually at the beginning of Act Two, is really meant to be at the end of Act Two with Fears, and it doesn't make any sense, to be honest, why Charlotta would open the Act Two talking about her entire life to two bored people who aren't even listening. That's an impossible scene to direct, and it's a reason why it's not what he wrote.
I think we maybe have time for about one more question. So I'll ask this question from Larry. When you're creating a new translation, either of a play or of a novel, how do you incorporate, or do you incorporate research about the writer's life or other writings into your translation?
Well, we don't.
So we have time for two more questions.
Yeah.
All right, great. We'll keep it moving along then.
Can I make one in terms of that one little thing about all of the volumes that should be mentioned, is that each volume of these plays has an introduction by Richard Pevear, and each introduction is really brilliant in my mind. I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of whether it's scholarship or however you want to put it, that Richard puts these plays into context, talks about their meaning, where they come from, the time they come from, but really talks about them in great, interesting, and I think profound depth.
Yeah, I probably didn't understand the question, because we certainly don't incorporate our knowledge about the author into the translation. But
Right.
yes, yeah, thank you, Richard.
We have another question from David. David wonders what you think of the trend of contemporary sort of edgy adaptations, such as Stupid Fucking Bird, the Siegel adaptation. And I would maybe add to that, what's your opinion on sort of more experimental productions of Chekhov plays versus productions that attempt to be more faithful to maybe the original intention of the author? What's the place of both of those kind of within the larger theatrical landscape?
Well, I would suppose that the theater people are free to do whatever they want with the text. Look what Shakespeare did, or the text he stole. He made plays out of them, but and you can do, I suppose you can do a seagull and call it what is it, Stupid Fucking Bird. Just for the fun of it, just for the staging of it. I don't know if anybody's going to go and say, "Oh, that's very profound," or "I like that," or whatever. But
You just take it for what it is. Dmitry Krymov, for instance, makes completely wild productions, but they're fascinating, interesting, very inventive. But nobody would say that this is Chekhov, or is it because he brings in Anna Karenina and whatever he likes.
I'm so glad you brought up that Krymov, Larissa. I saw a tape of it about a month ago, and it's wildly adapted, and yet so rooted to me, so deeply rooted in now and in that writer. Would it be appropriate, I'm sorry, Andy, to jump back in to talk about this Russian writer in the context of this tragedy that is unfolding right now?
Sure, yes.
I'd hope someone would ask that, actually, because this is something that I go back to all the time. This is from a Chekhov letter, and it's a very, very important, I think. He wrote, describing himself and his ambition, quote, "I am not a liberal, nor a conservative, nor a gradualist, nor a monk, nor an indifferentist. I wanted to be a free artist, and that's all. I hate lies and violence in all their forms. Hypocrisy, dim-wittedness, and tyranny reign not only in merchants' homes and police stations. I look upon brands and labels as prejudice. My holy of holies is a human body. Health, intelligence, talent, inspiration, love, and the most absolute freedom, freedom from violence and lies, however the two manifest themselves. That's Chekhov has a voice for today. He has a voice for the brilliant Russian culture of the 19th century and early 20th century. That's live, a part of all of them.
Yeah, which this present government is betraying every moment and reducing and destroying every moment. Yeah, it's a terrible thing, the thought that anti-Russian feeling will turn to Russian literature as well, where the whole spirit is against that, precisely against that, and so richly human. That's the most striking quality in Chekhov's work, is its full human quality. Without this horror that's going on.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I want to thank the four of you, Gregory, Richard, and Larissa, for that fascinating conversation. And thanks as well to all the TCG staff members who worked behind the scenes to make this event run smoothly this afternoon, and to the sponsors who supported it. A reminder, you can purchase all of the books in our Classic Russian Drama series, as well as all of TCG's books at tcg.org/books. And you can use the promo code Anton to get 30% off all print books in our Classic Russian Drama series, including this wonderful new translation of Ivanov. Finally, I want to thank everyone who joined us this afternoon. While today we were celebrating TCG Books, TCG does much more than just publishing. TCG exists to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology. And we do mean the whole theater ecology, from playwrights and play readers to theater artists, administrators, and audiences. If that's you, please visit tcg.org to learn more about our work. And to support TCG and TCG Books, visit tcg.org/donate. To keep up to date with everything TCG Books, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BooksTCG. And I would also direct your attention once more to huntertheater.net, where you can find out all about their upcoming events and productions. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you at another TCG Books event soon.